With the growing kidnapping trend related to drug and human smuggling, Phoenix residents worry the violence and trafficking will keep spreading and reach their homes.
Me da bastante temor porque mis hijos tienen que trabajar en la noche.
I am very frightened because my sons work at night and have to drive at night. And these times, you have to be very careful, even when you drive. You can't even turn to look at the person on the next car because you don't know if they have a weapon.
Era una pistola.
El crimen en Phoenix, pues yo creo que va a subir.
I think crime in Phoenix is going to increase, especially with the economy now. Many people come here illegally, and I think that is going to raise crime.
Va a subir el crimen.
Ahora que hemos estado bombardeados con todo eso del narcotráfico.
Now that we are being bombarded with drug trafficking and our families might get approached to obtain financial gain from it, we have to let the world know that there are better options.
El mundo, que hay otras opciones.
And the concerned citizens agree with the Secretary of State Hillary Clinton when she stated that the U.S. shares blame because of its demand for drugs and supply of weapons.
Many times they say that the border is patrolled and secure. That's not always true. There are many people who come and go without any trouble. So that makes you realize that corruption not only exists in Mexico, but here in the United States as well.
Honestly, I think that providers are there and consumers are here. It's like the thief who robs a house and sells the stuff. If there was no one to buy the stolen goods, he wouldn't rob them. Same thing with drugs. If they keep consuming here, they will keep smuggling the drugs. If they need weapons there, they will keep smuggling them from here.
Well, Ian Vasquez, it was considered something of a watershed when the Secretary of State said openly that the problem was being created by American demand for drugs. Does any response that addresses that demand have a shot at working?
I'm not sure, but I do agree that this is one of those areas where the U.S. is responsible for creating this massive problem. As long as there is this demand for drugs and the model remains prohibition, you're going to have these huge black market premiums which create all of the incentives that result in corruption and violence and the kinds of things that we've seen. The U.S. now has been fighting a domestic war on drugs for over 3 decades, and it has failed utterly. So we have tried all sorts of things, and they haven't worked. And this is one of the reasons why Mexico is in such a difficult position, because largely this problem is out of its control, and yet the U.S. puts pressure on it to fight this drug war. Unless and until the U.S. decriminalizes, at the very least, this problem is not going to go away in the U.S. or in Mexico.
Well, interdiction isn't having such a great run. Joy, is reduction demand going to get a look only because interdiction isn't working and people say, oh, well, let's try this? Does it have a shot now because of this violence?
Well, you know, I think for a long time we've had this idea that we could stop drugs from coming into the United States, or we could stop people from consuming, that this is a war that could be won. And I think the fundamental mental shift that needs to take place for the policies to change is to see this as to see consumption as a public health problem, and to realize that drugs create devastation at each stage of the drug process, at where it's grown, the countries it's trafficked through, and at the consumption level. And to start thinking about what are the best public policies to reduce the harm caused by drugs at each stage in that process.
Well, what's the answer to that question?
Well,
what are the best public policies?
You know, it depends on which stage you're looking at. I think the clear one on the consumption end is treatment on demand. I think the clear one on and education. I mean, we've done something in the United States. People don't smoke nearly as much as they used to. There are things that you can do to create a different culture. But at the where drugs are grown, for example, in the Andes, instead of going in and fumigating small farmers, who basically the drugs are grown by incredibly poor people, think about how to do rural economic development in areas that are where drugs are grown, and you have an ability to shift an economy. You have to think differently about it, and not just as we're going to go in and attack this thing and make it stop.
But I'm glad you brought up cigarettes, because there has been a social shift in the sanction for smoking cigarettes. But cigarettes are smoked in the open, so you can see people doing it, like the pathetic people in the middle of the winter who are outside the front door of their office catching a cigarette. We can see them doing it, and the social sanction for that changes. When you do needle drugs, when you ingest cocaine, it's often not a public act. So it's harder to create a social sanction against it. Does demand reduction have a hope? And is Mexico relying on it having some kind of hope? Francisco.
My sense, Ray, is that really for this analysis you have to introduce a timeline. In the very short term, I remain pessimistic about how much you can bring down the problem of addiction, although as Joy says, treatment on demand would be wonderful. For me, this is a policy that has to be implemented at kindergarten, primary school level. I think you'll see a generational change if kids are properly educated regarding the choice they have about consuming drugs. This means that probably in 15, 20 years' time, just as the war on tobacco, it took off sometime in the 80s, Surgeon General, more prominent displays. It takes, there's a lag for it to work. I would devote resources to having a strong communication infrastructure at the school level. I think that's going to help. But I think at the end of the day, you are right. Given the different public-private character of the way we indulge in these vices, there is an uphill struggle when it comes to addiction to, say, heroin, drugs that have to be injected. No need to give up on it and say, well, if we can't do anything at the moment, then better not do anything at all. Education, resources for education, but that's going to bear fruit 15, 20 years along the line. In the very short term, I think it's stemming the flow of cash and guns that can help Mexico.